If you've ever felt frustrated trying to paint waves, watching your seascapes turn into a muddy mess of whites and blues, then you're not alone. Maybe you've struggled getting that realistic foam effect, or your waves look flat and lifeless instead of dynamic and powerful.
Hi, I'm Sam and I've helped thousands of artists to improve their seascape paintings, taking them from flat and lifeless to dynamic and powerful. So in this video I'm going to show you how to paint this scene, and I'm going to show you it in 5 actionable steps.
Now the first thing I do once I've sketched out the composition in my painting is I begin by painting the dark values and shadows first. Now value refers to how light or dark a subject is, and the general rule is we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, and then as landforms recede the darks aren't as dark and the lights aren't as light, and this applies to seascapes as well. So I'm starting off by painting the dark values in the rocks here in the foreground, and I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with a little burnt sienna and some alizarin crimson to start with. Now I'm painting in oils here, and the brand of oil paint I'm using is Blue Ridge Oils, and if you want to get some I've put a link in the description box below. I sketched out the composition on the canvas using burnt sienna mixed with a little pale drying gel. Now as I said, I start by painting the darks first. So what's the reason for doing this? Well, I've found that it actually makes it easier to create a whole tonal framework in the painting. So it makes it easier to then paint the areas in light afterwards and also get the saturation of the colours correct. So what I was doing here was I was just finding out where the main areas of darks are, which are mostly in the rock shadows, in the cracks in the rocks. But then even some of the rocks in the distance, they're starting to get a little bit lighter, so I've mixed in a little bit of titanium white into the mix. Now I've also included the cloud shadows here among my darks, even though clouds and skies are generally one of the more lighter values in the landscape. However, these are shadows, and actually you can still get some pretty dark cloud shadows. I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, a little alizarin crimson and titanium white, so actually the same colours that I've used in the rocks, and this is going to help to create the colour harmony in the painting where I'm using common colours throughout the painting. I've also edged the mixture more on the blue side so that the colours don't look muddy, and then I'm able to use a similar cloud colour mix for the shadows in the white water in the foreground. Now the white water is much lighter in value, obviously white, the lightest value that we can go, so it means the shadows in the white water are also going to be pretty light. So that's something to keep in mind. So in this stage of the painting, all the dark values have been established, and then it's time to start painting the areas in light. Now this brings me on to the second step in my painting process, and that's to use loose brushwork during the block-in stage. The block-in stage is where we're just going to mark in the main areas in the painting, get the main lights and darks established, the colours established, and then we've got something that we can work on once the painting is dry. So to begin with, I'm not going to be using any detail at all. It's just going to be loose gestural brushwork. And having this loose painting to start with is just going to add life and vitality to the painting overall and just make it look alive. There's going to be plenty of time to add detail later on, so if one of the things you're struggling with is your work is too detailed, then start off by painting nice and loose first of all, so using the biggest brushes that you can get away with, and that's what I do with my paintings. So here I'm using nice broad gestural brush marks to paint this breaking wave, and I've started off by painting the translucent area using a mix of titanium white with a little yellow ochre and phthalo green, and then as I've worked my way down to the lower part of the breaking wave, I've made the value darker and started adding ultramarine blue to the mix, so we've got a nice turquoised ocean colour here, and then I've used the same colours in the sea in the background as well. So if you're ever unsure of what colours to use to mix a nice turquoise blue ocean colour, then ultramarine blue, phthalo green, a little yellow ochre and titanium white works really well. Now at this point in the painting, the blocking in stage was well underway, and I'd painted some of the highlights in the clouds using a mix of titanium white with some burnt sienna. So it's just a little bit of burnt sienna in there, and I'm not using the lightest lights in the clouds just yet, so allowing some of the shadow areas to mix in. And then I also just added a little bit more shadows to some of these clouds. For the sky, I used a mix of ultramarine blue with some titanium white and just a little bit of phthalo green, so that's just going to add a green element to it. Ultramarine blue actually has a red undertone to it, so adding the phthalo green is just going to make the sky a bit more of a rich blue. But you've got to be careful to make sure that the sky is not too saturated either. The next thing I did was to paint the white water that's in light on the breaking wave as it's barreling over. Now let me explain something that's really important about creating convincing looking waves. The foam and white water is not completely white, in fact it's various shades of light grey in most cases. And if you want to avoid having a flat looking seascape, it's really important that we're not using our lightest value colours at this stage. We want to save those until the end. So it's best to keep the white water and just the painting overall tonally darker to begin with, and then we've got plenty of room to build up lighter layers of paint as we work through the painting. Now moving on to step number 3, and the blocking in stage was complete and the painting was dry. So we're beginning the next part, which is the modelling stage. Now this is where I'm starting to build up the details and work on individual zones in the painting. So for this particular painting session, I was working on the rocks and really beginning to define their shapes. Now rocks aren't always the easiest things to paint, so I just started off by identifying where, again, the darkest darks are, where the halftones are in the rocks and where the highlights are. I'm also now using synthetic flat brushes, which produce a much more defined edge than compared with the bristle brushes. So when I start a painting, I normally just use bristle brushes so it's nice and loose, but if I want to start doing detail work, especially with things like rocks, then synthetic flat brushes work much better. Now with this painting, I didn't just get straight into it by copying photographs. I planned this whole painting, starting off with thumbnail sketches and then a main sketch to design the whole composition. Now having this plan for my paintings and following this process actually really skyrocketed my paintings in general. So if you'd like to learn how to do this and improve your paintings, then check out my free landscape painting blueprint where I detail my whole process for painting landscapes that you can apply to your own paintings. Just click the link below and I'll send it over to you. As I say, it's totally free. Enjoy. Now as part of the modelling process, I was working on the sky, so really starting to add more definition to those clouds. I really wanted to create a stormy sky in the background, and with these darker tones in the clouds, it's going to really add drama to the painting, especially when juxtaposed against the highlights that are in the breaking waves. Now once I'd finished detailing the clouds here, I then moved on to the main part of the ocean and the breaking wave, which is the main hero in the painting. One of the things I felt with this breaking wave is that the wave could be darker in value, so I decided to add another layer of paint. Just adding another layer was just darkening the value anyway, but I'm still using a mix of ultramarine blue with a little bit of yellow ochre, some titanium white and some phthalo green. So the phthalo green is really key to getting those turquoise tones in the ocean. But be careful not to use too much of it, it's a very powerful colour, so only a small amount is needed. Again, I'm just applying the paint here with some loose gestural brush marks using a bristle flat brush, and then just blending in some of those colours where the wave transitions into the more translucent area of the painting. And it's the translucency that's really going to grab the attention in this seascape. So right now I'm still modelling the paint here and just working on individual zones to create more depth within the painting. Now one of the things you can do to really make convincing looking breaking waves is to add foam patterns to them. So these are just tendrils of foam that you'll often find in breaking waves. They also help to communicate the wave barreling over as well. So this is something that I added here using my shadow mix which is mainly ultramarine blue, a little burnt sienna to desaturate, some titanium white and a little alizarin crimson. Now this leads on to the fourth stage of the painting, where I'm adding more details and just refining the painting. So this is the stage where I'm starting to see the finish line and thinking about getting the artwork finished, but there's still a lot to do. So in this case I'm adding more lighter tone to the white water, but I'm still not using pure titanium white just yet. My lightest tones, I'm slowly building up those lighter tones, and this is the real key to creating convincing looking seascapes that have got depth. If I was to use my lightest tones to begin with, the whole thing would just look flat. So even now, with the highlights that I'm adding to the white water and the swash zone in the painting, I'm still not using pure white here. Instead, I've added a little bit of ultramarine blue, some burnt sienna and a little bit of alizarin crimson. Such a small amount just to darken the value, but making sure that the value is lighter than the previous layer that I've added, but not completely white, because that's my lightest tones and I'm going to be saving those until the end. Now, refining the painting includes sharpening up some of the forms that are within the painting, such as the breaking waves here in the swash zone, adding more of those shadows. It's just defining the edge of it here, so adding more of that shadow mix, for example. Then adding details to the rocks, further details, and just generally getting the painting ready so that I can add the last details, which comes right at the end. Next, working on the foreground here, and I was working on these foam patterns, and these are actually helping with the composition because they're helping to lead the eye towards the midground to where the breaking wave is. So we want to have these subtle elements within our composition that's just going to lead the eye to the main focal area. Once I'd finished working on the foreground here, I let the whole painting dry, and this allowed me to be able to add the final details, which is the last step in the whole painting process. So this is now where I'm adding my lightest layers of paint. In this case, just these few little highlights where the sun's catching the water directly. And for this I was using a mix of pure titanium white with just a little bit of yellow ochre. Now the yellow ochre is just going to warm up the white, and I was using a combination of brushes, including synthetic and bristle brushes, to create some varying brush marks and tones to communicate that wild sea. So to recap on the painting, it's really best to have a process to follow. So to begin with, I always start by painting my darks first, then I block in the rest of the painting using loose brush marks. I then started the modelling phase where I'm working on individual zones. I refined the painting and added some more details. And then finally I added the last details, which included the lightest values in the whole scene. I also changed up the foreground a little bit as I felt there was too much going on with the foam patterns there and it just needed a little bit of space, so I painted some clear water. Then after that the painting was complete. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it inspires you to paint some seascapes. If you'd like to learn more about painting seascapes, then check out this video here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.